Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director, welcome back. The Bureau recently announced it was invoking dormant authority to examine non-bank consumer finance companies. Your press release uses the term fintechs, but the problem with running your agency by press release as opposed to rulemaking is that nobody understands what you're referring to when you talk about dormant authority, and nobody understands what you're talking about when you say fintech. So I'm going to ask you to be very specific here. What category of non-bank firms do you assert you have authority to supervise?
So I'm trying to be as responsive as possible. There's two different authorities established. One is enforcement authority. That's where we have to issue civil investigative demand. You go to court to sue them. That's the full jurisdiction. Separate and apart from that, Congress has established three categories that's subject to bank-like supervisory examinations. So this is the third category that hasn't been used. We have gotten feedback, particularly
What
from
non-banks?
banks.
What non-banks?
Okay, so I'm going to explain. There are non-banks that are automatically covered regardless of size in the statute. All in the mortgage industry, essentially, all in the payday industry, and all in the private student loan industry.
Okay, let me reclaim my time and drill down a little bit more specifically. You are the director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So you understand this means you lack authority to examine businesses that provide credit or funding to non-consumers, merchants, businesses, correct?
Yeah, if you're not covered under a covered person under the Consumer Financial Protection Act for enforcement, you certainly can't be supervised.
Okay, thank you. One of the few areas where the Bureau has actually...
Or a service provider, I should say. It's covered person, service provider, what's in the statute.
Okay, but you don't have jurisdiction over non-consumers. One of the few areas where the Bureau actually has promulgated a rule is Section 1071. The rule as proposed would impose a new, massively complex and burdensome data collection requirement that would put commercial loan officers in the unfair, uncomfortable, and highly inappropriate position of guessing a borrower's race or ethnic background based on visual observation or surname when the borrower refuses to disclose it. More than a few small rural community banks in my district have reviewed your proposed rulemaking, and they have told me that they will be forced to completely exit the small business lending market, leaving their small business borrowers with fewer options and higher cost of credit. You talk a lot about competition and helping rural banking deserts, and I appreciate and applaud you and the Bureau for putting out this focus on rural banking. But what I'm telling you is that based on the feedback from my constituents, if your supervision and enforcement reduces or eliminates financial services and products, you are reducing and eliminating competition, and you're exacerbating banking deserts in rural areas. So I want you to respond to that.
Great. And let me also clarify, you're right. There are some authorities that relate to small business lending beyond normal consumer lending. Look, as it relates to small business loan data collection, that's an act of Congress. I'm under, right now, a court order to be able to make progress on it. I did not make the proposal you've referred to that was proposed before. We are currently going through all the comments. We are trying to make sure that we are looking at ways so that we can reduce the likelihood of cost.
And reclaiming my time, the Bureau lacks authority over non-consumer businesses other than 1071. But what I'm saying about 1071 is that I'm getting feedback from small rural community banks that you say you have a focus on. And I know you're well-intentioned on this, but they're telling me they're going to exit the small business lending market because of the complexity and the burdensome nature of this rulemaking. I urge you to review 1071. Don't force these community banks to exit small business lending in rural areas if you care about these banking deserts. Finally, you in your request for information, you solicited public comment on what you refer as junk fees. Can you cite any legal or statutory authority that defines junk fees?
No. Junk fees are something that everyone experiences in so many parts of their financial life. We try and make sure we are understanding what is happening in terms of businesses, in terms of consumers.
I understand that.
To be able to report
in my remaining
what their
20 seconds, your stated goal in the request for information is to exercise your, quote, enforcement, supervision, regulatory, and other authorities. This implies some illegal activity is happening in this space. outline with specificity the illegal activity you allege to be taking place with regard to consumer financial product fees.
Well, we are happy to provide you with enforcement actions that have occurred under both of my predecessors that relate to fees.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Problem
But
is, there's no due process. Nobody knows what you're talking
be
about.
put into the
I
written
will
record.
respond to the record for you on that.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from New York, Mrs.